It is an introductory and a survey type study. That's what we're going to do, is jump across the book in giving you some idea of its makeup and thoughts. When you move from David to Solomon, you come to an individual, if you put it in the context of Matthew, the 25th chapter, where Jesus taught about giving to one 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, and he added according to their several ability. And of course it's fundamental. Different people have different skills. I remember our daughter talking about a young man she worked with that was severely mentally handicapped. And they were trying to both understand his lack of understanding and at the same time develop him, if they could, mentally into a little bit more of a normal pattern of living in society. And she was asked to work with him. But she noticed something he was doing one day, and he seemed to have an uncanny ability, if he was taking something and going to put it 10 foot over there in the wastebasket, of hitting it every time. And so she put him to a test. There was a little spot in the corner of the room, and she gave him a little, I don't know what is it, a wad of paper or what, to throw and see how close he could come to that. He hit it every time, 3 times in a row. And here he is, not even able to go to a regular school because of a lack of mental capacity. And yet, in that particular area, fantastic, unique, unusual, and unexpected skill. Well, I've got an entire sheet here I could have on just Solomon, and we're not going to do that, but we're moving into the man that is generally, even in the Old Covenant people of God, known as the wisest man who lived throughout that 39-book survey of God's people. And yet he was not the most successful man. He was, in one respect, through the earlier part of his life, and then he stumped his toe, fouled up, ruined his life, and at the end, the kingdom is not only about to divide the country, but in addition to that, there was all kind of taxes and things being weighed upon the people that left everybody unsettled. So he went from one of the wisest, sharpest, had kings from all over the earth coming to get his wisdom at one time. And then, after he got involved with about 1,000 women, he went too far in that direction, and a lot of other areas of his life became corrupted. So Solomon is a very interesting personality, but he's a sober warning to any of you here who might have some special skills. You better watch out. You can still get in trouble. And Proverbs, in a way, gives us some of that information. Ecclesiastes, when Marty surveys that with you, will give even more, as it concludes generally all is vanity. Vanity and vexation of spirit. But the Proverbs repeatedly are trying to draw people to the good side of living. Ecclesiastes largely is warning us about how we can get engulfed with or hooked on the bad side of life. And everyone got here today because you got life. What are you doing with it? Well, let's get into the Proverbs and note a few things that it gives. You've just, most of you, gotten the outline or the preview of the introductory material, so I'm not going to go into detail in some of this first page, sure enough. We're going to kind of like a rock going across the water, hit the high spots, and what I think could help you in studying Proverbs if you want to, but not any starting at the first verse and looking then at the second and so forth procedure right now. You have in part one there of the outline are generally classified as wisdom literature, along with Job and Ecclesiastes. And then it has a breakdown in the A part there of two different types of study. That idea, philosophia, or philosophy as we say it in English, a pursuit of wisdom is the heart of the Proverbs, and that shows up in many different ways. Part A, two classes of wisdom literature. If you went through Proverbs and Job, Ecclesiastes, so forth. Practical instructions on how to live a good and successful life. Be happy. Now that is the one we're looking at. The next one, discover the meaning of life. Study man's suffering and tragedy while asking why. That's primarily what you find in Job with all his pain problems and trying to figure out why it had happened to him and so forth, circumstances. And Ecclesiastes, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. But we're coming in really to where you get more of the happy side, and I hope we'll cover enough verses today that you'll pick up an idea or two that might make you a little bit happier this week. And if so, it's been good for you to be here in that regard. To the credit of another wise man in the yesterday named Solomon. Down in the second division, you have just some attempt to try to give you an idea of when you're reading the book, things you might keep in mind that might speed up your comprehension of its unique makeup. Part A under number 2 is a parable. And in the King James translation, you find the word proverb one place where in the Septuagint or the Greek text of the Old Testament, it is parabole. It's a parable. But yet in the English, they just translate it proverb because some of the proverbs are parables. They're made up like that. Well, what is it? You probably already know, but turn to the 6th chapter. We're going to look at that one. I'm not covering all the verses you'll notice here at all, but pick up a few that seem to highlight the point we're making. A parable, that's one bit of teaching you find in several places in these 31 chapters. Proverbs 6, beginning in verse 6. Go to the ant. We're just talking about Solomon being one of the wisest men, and he tells us to go look at an ant. But there are lessons to be learned there. Go to the ant. And he's talking about, surely none of you here today, but you sluggard. In the outline you have there with the back, I've got a group of themes that are followed all the way through the book. We'll touch on that more in a moment, but one of them is laziness. And there are several passages in Proverbs that relates to lazy people. Now, if you have ever been one, you know you can get in trouble that way, and that's what we're looking at here of a sluggard. And Solomon says, you go look at an ant. Consider her ways and be wise. Go to school under an ant. Well, what would you learn? Well, they're having no captain, overseer, or ruler. There's some people, if you don't keep a leash on them, they're in trouble just 1 minute after another. Some people seem to be gifted in getting in trouble. Ants don't get in trouble. Well, they could if a person steps on them or something like that. But if you go by their little bitty brain, and they've got to have one because of the things they do, you go to that little bitty brain and you watch it, and they don't waste any time, and they get a whole lot done. So they're doing it amazingly without captain, overseer, or ruler. You've got three different orders of men directing men in the last, or in that verse. Captain would be military. Jacob, I think, is in here somewhere. I don't remember where he said. Well, that's one, but I'm talking about the other Jacob. He was in here a moment. Yeah, he's back there with sound booth. Well, he's in the military. Tech sergeant, something like that. Get up to be captain, you're moving up, where you direct a lot of people. Ant doesn't have a captain. And then you got overseer. Now we've got overseers here in this congregation, the Greek term episkopos, overseers, elders, presbyteros, the older people who are wise. And that's in the New Covenant pattern of the organization of the Lord's church. So you've got the spiritual side, you've got the military side, and then you got ruler. Now we are dealing with judges, presidents, senators, representatives. The point is, he said an ant doesn't have any of these helping keep their life moving in a good, positive direction. But guess what? They keep moving. And if you watch them, they're usually doing something and getting something done. It may be miniature or small task, but they get it done in an amazing way. When we were in Nigeria, we'd see ant hills, 7, 8 foot tall. Ants largely built those hills. Little bitty creatures. But you better not get in the path of a stream of them, or they'll take down a person. And hence, here these are little bitty creatures, and they don't have the guides that help you and me get along through life. Now, I know if you get bad overseers, or if you get bad rulers, or if you get a bad captain, you're in trouble, because they can do misdeeds and mislead. But generally, they are wise. That's why they're where they are, and they help things keep moving in a good, positive, efficient way. And yet, the ant doesn't have that. Verse 8, but she provides her supplies in the summer and gathers her food in the harvest. Now, if you go to the agriculturalist or the farmer, he'll tell you right quickly that there's a certain time for planting and tilling, getting the ground ready. All kinds of work got to be done on this earth to get production. Somehow these little rascals get production. Provides her supplies in the summer, gathers her food in the harvest, which means she didn't have a crop failure. Whatever it was they were assembling, they got it. And they stored it up, not just using up everything. Some young people come along, get an inheritance, and blow it in 1 year. But it could have taken them for years had they properly applied it. These are little things. And the ants, fortunately, teach us that's the way to do it. When you get a good crop, store it up. You remember the story of Joseph down in Egypt? What happened? They had 7 years of, what was it? Wake up with me now. Plenty. And then they had 7 years of what? Famine. And what had Joseph done that enabled them to handle the days of famine down in Egypt? Stored it up, didn't he? In the years of plenty. And he said he got that idea from God. He knows pretty well what we need to be doing, but here an ant has that kind of instinctive knowledge. Verse 9. I've got to move on or I won't get anywhere near where I want to go. How long will you slumber, O sluggard? Now, why is it that the sluggard doesn't do better than an ant? Why do people end up worse off than a little creature like that? Well, one thing is they're lazy. Slumber. Sleep. And it's pretty well described here. When will you rise from your sleep? Stay down too long. And then a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. Heard an illustration once of a lazy fellow. A man was coming down the road and there was a fork in the road and he knew he needed to go further to get to his destination, but he wasn't real sure whether to take to the left or the right. And there was a man lying under a tree there, hat pulled down over his nose, and he thought, this man probably knows this community. I'll ask him which one of the roads he needed to follow to get to his destination. And the man under the tree stretched out, moved 1 foot about that far. That's the one he needed to take. And the man looked at him and laughed and he said, I believe that's the laziest statement I ever made. If you can make a lazier statement, I'll give you $1. He said, put it in my pocket. So you can get lazy, you can waste time, and you can get in trouble. Look at verse 11. After all this sleep, slumbering, folding of hands, so shall your poverty come on you like a prowler. Now your poverty comes with a prowler involved when you don't expect him. If you knew the thief was coming, you would have locked the door. You know all the precautions we take. But when you've got someone sneaking around, they come up and bring you down when you didn't realize it's going to happen today. He's saying that's the way it is with a lazy man. Your need will be like an armed man. You are conquered. A little brief parable. And Solomon is saying, go to an ant, learn lessons. Now, there are lessons like that all the way through the book. But we're trying to see the different kinds. Now, a proverb may be without comparison. Look in the 18th chapter. We're going to look at verse 24. I believe that'll be maybe the best one to briefly touch on this. A short, pointed, sharp-pointed saying of comparison. Proverbs 18:24. A man who has friends must himself be friendly. You reap what you sow. But there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. How does the last part tie in with the first part? To just show how deep friendship can go. There are levels of friends, casual friends, deep friends, family friends, different kinds. And there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. You've probably somewhere along the way, like I have, had someone say, I'm closer to some of the members of the church than I am of my own family. That's right, it can be that way. And this is a comparison then of not only friendliness, but good friendliness, all in one verse. So when you're reading, when you have two sections together, we're going to be looking at several of these that come out in different ways. And if you get your mind right, then you can better understand what Solomon and the Holy Spirit is teaching us. I had a member from this congregation call me this past week. She had been studying in Job, had a passage that didn't make any sense at all to her. So she called me up, and we spent a little time on it. You know what primarily I mentioned to her? To look at the other part of the verse. And she had part of the explanation for the hard saying it. She didn't see how it made any sense. But if you tied it in with the other one, it did. Well, let's look at the third one. There can be, though, a proverb like we had there without comparison. Look now in 25 and 25. This definitely is a case of where one part of the verse helps explain the other part. Proverbs 25:25. As cold water to a weary soul, so is good news from our country. Now that first part, as cold water is to a weary soul, you know that if you were out weary in a hot day, get a good drink of the day. Well, now, how is he applying that? Those who spread good news from a far country. I got several letters years ago from Sister Patton. She is a lady that was an Abilene Christian, later went into mission work into Germany. And when she would write from Germany, at the end of her letter where she signed the close, she put Proverbs 25, verse 25. Over in Germany, maybe a little bit of depression or loneliness. And she'd sign that, hoping that that'd wake me up to write her back so she'd get some good news from a far country. And it's as refreshing. When we were in Nigeria, I can still tell you right where I would walk to open up the little door at the post office to get our mail. Our daughter this past week had gotten a group of letters recently that somehow had been preserved that Ruth wrote from Nigeria back about 35 years ago, and she was just mentioning what a joy it was because Tanya was there when these letters came and so forth, and the little bits of news. I still remember I was in Nigeria at the time when the plane crashed, you remember, with the A&M or Oklahoma State basketball team, I believe, wasn't it? The coach and one of the newsmen. I still remember getting that letter in Nigeria from Ruth. It wasn't, of course, in that day good news, but things that you can share, write down, may be a precious thing to someone else. It can be refreshing, like water to a thirsty soul. Let's look at another. Some to instruct, 4:23. We'll look at that one. Proverbs 4:23. I guess all of these teach us in some ways. Some are just a little bit more in the teaching area. Keep your heart with all diligence. Whatever your biggest effort of the day will be, take care of your heart. And I'm not talking about your blood pump, really, and I don't think Solomon is either. But the heart is primarily the storehouse for all of the principles that God's given us that we've learned along the way. And this is just giving us the urge, keep your heart how? With all diligence. Well, why worry so much about that? For out of it spring the issues of life. We're going to be looking at some others in a moment later that'll be dealing with prolonging life and things. How do you get the most out of a day? Part of it is wisdom. And here is just the suggestion that you've got to get it in your heart, though. Don't just let it hit and bounce off. How many things do you retain each day? How many things do you forget each day? Some people retain more and live better. Some people retain more and get in trouble. Some people retain more and they are abundantly happy. John 10:10, Jesus says, if you put your heart in the right place and give diligent attention to what you put in it, then you'll pick up on what I've come to do. I am come that you may have life and have it abundantly. Now, there are different levels right out here in this audience now. Some of you have come today a little tired and weary, some happy, some concerned, some hurting. All different levels right here. And it's how we handle many of the principles that God has given and do what he suggests here, keeping our heart with all diligence, that'll determine how we'll live today. Is that practical? Then let's come to one other. Proverbs 6:16 through 19 has often been quoted, and this is given as didactic poems. Didaskalos in Greek is the word for learning or teacher. Got my tongue mixed up. A didaskalos is a teacher. And so these are the ones especially written to give us special instruction, and it's done in a poetic form if you knew the Hebrew behind these words. Now look at the verses. These 6 things the Lord hates. Mentioned more than once that one part of love is hate. And the deeper your love is, the greater your hate may be. Now it sounds strange because they seem totally opposites, but they aren't. And the best way maybe to illustrate it, if you love someone and someone hurts them, do you hate what caused them to be hurt, or maybe even hate the person that did it to them? And the deeper your love is, the greater your hate will be. That's why God, 1 John 4:8 is love. But here are things God hates. And it's the kind of love he has that causes him to hate these things. Yea, 7 are an abomination to him, a proud look. Yet people keep being born and ending up filled with pride. A lying tongue. Man, that can hurt somebody. It may hurt several. Hands that shed innocent blood. Hands that shed any blood is bad. But it's so very bad when someone is innocent and someone treats them that way. A heart that devises wicked plans. Plot and plan. Use brain power in order to hurt somebody else. Man, that's sad. God hates that. You'll notice how many different parts of the anatomy down through this little poetic piece are involved. You've got just the eyes looking, and a lying tongue, and hands, and a heart, and now feet that are swift in running to evil. I mentioned earlier about people that just go from one bad thing to another. Help them get out of one mess and they'll be in another one tomorrow. Sad. And it doesn't have to be that way. God hates that. And now back again to some tongue problem, a false witness who speaks lies. Now lies were already mentioned before, but now this is one person telling a bad thing about another person. And that just deepens the potential problem. One who sows discord among the brethren. It's been so sad ever since the New Testament was written. Brethren over at Corinth, I'm of Paul, I'm of Cephas, I'm of Apollos, lining up behind their special preacher and not getting along with each other. That's sad. They ought to all be growing together, and if there's something good in Apollos, love him for it. But you don't have to deny Paul or Peter in order to love Apollos. Blend them together. I have thought of writing maybe a little book someday on and are. And there's so many cases where it's one thing and another. Is Paul all right? Well, sure. Well, I'd rather have Apollos. Well, why not have Apollos and Paul both? You see where the and comes in? But this is are with division tracing through it. Sad, sad. I like him, but I don't like her. Well, now, there may be principles in people, but you can love your enemies and pray for them that persecute you. And you'll live better day by day with that attitude than hating some. Well, here it is. I've taken more time on this than I wanted to or intended to, but think of these different types. Sometime it's a comparison. Come down to part B. We'll touch on that very briefly. What you call the distich, which is just a Hebrew parallelism, and it's done in 2 or 3 different ways. Number one, the idea of the first line is repeated in the second in a slightly altered form. Looking for 24 and 25. And I'm touching on these simply because if you remember this, it might help you understand some of these verses when you are reading through. You might think, oh, I need to look at the next part and see what it says. 4, 24 and 25. Put away from you a deceitful mouth. Put perverse lips far from you. There's the first line. Just said the same thing, really, in the second part. Perverse lips far from you. Let your eyes look straight ahead, and your eyelids look right before you. In other words, your eyes are not off course, they stay on course. And in the context, that has some special meaning. But then there is the second way, and that's where the second line may illustrate the first by presenting not a similarity or a comparison or an enlargement, but a contrast. Look in 10, 1 and 2. Proverbs of Solomon. One line illustrating the first by a contrast. A wise son makes a glad father. But look at the next part. A foolish son is a grief to his mother. Contrast. So you have that type. You see the importance of looking at both sides in these dual factors from verse to verse. Then you've got third, a distinct truth may be presented in each line with little or no really connecting link. Look in the 11th chapter. You're fairly close to it where you are right now anyhow. And we're going to look in verse 29. He who troubles his own house will inherit the wind. Well, you don't pay many bills with the wind blowing in Oklahoma. You got plenty of wind, but it doesn't pay any bills. And I'm just using one illustration to illustrate another illustration. But he who troubles his own house will inherit the wind, and the fool will be a servant to the wise of heart. There's not really a connection from the second to the first. So I hope that may help you when you're reading. You might keep this in mind, and if you have a verse that's giving you a little trouble, come back and look here and see if maybe the breakdown is a pattern that could help you understand the verse better. Now, I'm not going to do much more on that first page. You've got down there the writers of the book. Solomon wrote most of it down at the part 5. Verse 29, chapters have been repeatedly related to Solomon. And then there's a little bit by Augur, the son of Jakeh. And then King Lemuel gives us the worthy woman that many have thought about, and some other thoughts in the 31st chapter. There's just a sweeping survey. Canonicity simply relates to whether people have thought it was inspired or not. Well, I don't hopefully need to talk about that to any of you. I think you all agree that Solomon was inspired and the book's inspired, and let's get on to studying it. So come over on the next page. And we're going to devote the rest of the time we have to this part down toward the bottom, the fear of the Lord. Now, if you look over after that, you see the next page, how many passages you have that relate to God in the book of Proverbs. God is seen in Proverbs, and then down toward the bottom of the page, the home as seen in Proverbs, the tongue in Proverbs. These are themes, thoughts that are scattered throughout the book. And so read through those just from the standpoint, if you are wondering something about the tongue or about the home or God, you'll know those are in there, and there's the verses. If you go all the way through the book that relate to those different themes. And so you might do a theme study. Fear of the Lord. Well, I've got 5 minutes to do an hour's work. The word fear, I want to give that to you because it ties in with all the statements on the right. Fear, if you were to look up the Hebrew term, yarah, Y-A-R-A-H, yarah. It has, first of all, the word fear, and the next word to it is reverence. And that doesn't seem to be akin at all. But then down later in the lexicon definition is the word holy fear. Well, now maybe you can see some connection with reverence and fear. Holy fear. Towards God, piety is another part of the definition of that word. Have piety towards God. And then in another type literary expression, the precepts of religion are piety, the revealed will of God. And so it's not only God, but what God has revealed and spoken. Have a pious attitude. Come to love this book. Love it and live it, and you'll get the best of life. Right quickly, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes. Let's just highlight these. We won't turn to the verses. But the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. If you want to know where to get the ABCs of life, start. Of course, some of you have lived long enough now that you can't hardly do like a 4 or 5-year-old could. But whatever the rest of the time you have, how about wanting to know God from now to the day you die? It's pretty good. Know Him better. Talk to Him longer. Follow His directions more. Then the fear of the Lord, piety toward His word, is to hate evil. If you don't hate it, you're probably going to hold on to some of it, and it'll just hurt you. Evil, arrogancy. I'm sure no one here is arrogant. You wouldn't think you were somebody special. Or would you? Some have. And the evil way and the froward or the perverted mouth. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And that's what I've already said once. And then the fear of the Lord prolongeth days. That word in the Hebrew, prolongs, yasaf, means to add or increase. And the interesting part is it's at least dual in nature. It's what you get done in a day. Prolong the days mean you get more done. Have you ever had a day, man, I wish I could have a day like this every day. Everything clicked. Now, you've had days like that, and they're precious. You like them. Well, a pious attitude toward God may help you get more out of each minute of the day. But then over in Ephesians 6, 1, 2, and 3, I believe it is, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise that you may live long upon the earth. You live longer. I like that because I'm 89 now, and that's ahead of some of you. And but that won't be worth anything according to Ecclesiastes, which Marty will be talking to you later about. If you waste it, you could live 1,000 years, wasted time, and it's nothing but trouble and trials. So, prolongeth days, fear of the Lord, it gives more, is strong confidence. There's a good word study. And there's a bell too. Is a fountain of life. Ponce de Leon, you remember, came over to this country looking for the place of long living. Well, it's not related to a place, it's related to a person. It's the fear of the Lord that gives you the fountain of life. I hope we've hit this enough. I'll stop because I'm supposed to. But it's a rich book, and I hope Marty will have time to share more of it with you so that you'll be wise like Solomon in his good days. And I hope you have one today.